For the last few years, I've been getting together with a group of people about every month to sing and play music. And typically, it's on a Saturday. And inevitably, one of my friends will ask me, "So, what are you preaching on Sunday?" Well, now I'm not preaching more than I have to. I usually toss off some sort of quick answer, but yesterday was together with some friends, and they said, "So, what are you preaching on?" I said, "The parable of the 10 bridesmaids." One of the guys who's an actor looks at me and he said, "Oh, is that like 7 brides for 7 brothers?" Or the Princess Bride? And then everybody kind of started chiming in with all these other bride movie titles, and I said, "No." They said, "Not exactly." And it happens to be my least favorite parable. Well, the story of the 10 bridesmaids at first look seems rather judgmental, and it seems kind of like people are being left out, and I hate that. Well, I did some research, and though this parable hasn't really gone up much in my estimation, perhaps some of this background and greater understanding of the text will help you as it helps me. So, first off, this parable shows up in 3 of the Gospels, Mark, Matthew, and Luke. So we know that Jesus at least told it a version of this parable. It may not be exactly as Matthew told it. But Matthew's story seems to reflect the concerns of his community. And it's probably the same worry that bothered the church in the Thessalonian church. And Paul's letter that Monica read for us today addresses the worries about those who have died, what happens when Jesus comes. And Matthew's gospel is also alluding to the return of Jesus and encourages a faithful attitude of readiness for when that happens. So imagine living in that time, and in the forefront of people's minds might have been the teaching which we've all heard: anyone that believes in me will never die. Never? Back then, how would you understand that? That we would live until Jesus came? Well, then what happens is people start going to funerals in the church. And they start saying, "Wait a minute, well, what about that person and this person? Is it too late for them?" And so I imagine the church in Thessaloniki deacons gathering, sending a frantically pleading letter to Paul, who taught them all these things in the first place, saying, "Paul, what do we tell the people?" Well, Paul writes back, "Don't worry. Waking or sleeping," a term that's used to refer to those who have died. Waking or sleeping, we are all in Christ's care when he returns. So and those who are sleeping will be the first ones to rise up with Jesus. So where do the 10 bridesmaids fit in? And like I said, on first glance, some of the story seems a little judgmental. It seems a little weird. Why would a sign of not being ready for the return of Christ is that people, one of the signs that isn't read is marrying and being given in marriage. Well, that's one of the messages about that was that marriage was a distraction in the early community. So you should stay single and just wait for Jesus to come. So it was a distraction. And then the other question is, why do half of the bridesmaids seem to be better than the other ones? And when looking a little closer at the story, we hear that all of the bridesmaids were drowsy and fell asleep, which makes sense because that's what happens when you're trying to stay up all night waiting for something to happen. You get drowsy. And then most first graders, not only us, but most first graders would wonder why the wise ones didn't share with the foolish ones. Most commentators are all too happy to give us an answer for that one, but maybe the parable's just, it's straightforward. There's nothing here to suggest that the wise bridesmaids are being greedy or unhelpful. They just say, you need to get your own. So it seems like if Jesus is the one who told this parable, he's not trying to create starry-eyed disciples who do nothing but scan the horizon and for clues of history's end. This parable is for people of all times, encouraging all of us to be focused disciples who keep our eyes on the message and the good news of the gospel. We're encouraged to be wise, like the wise bridesmaids. Be prepared. It's a good scouting motto. So being prepared means we aren't reactive to things that happen in our life. We are ready. So the wise don't bother with dire predictions like the end is near, as we hear every couple of years from some new prophecy. They're predictions that make us think that we don't need to bother with things like taking care of the environment or working for peace within the nations or nurturing faith strong enough to deal with issues that may crop up many years from now. The wise aren't being reactive. They're taking the long look. But as we know, taking that long look, watching and waiting and being patient is hard. How do you sustain the energy? How do you sustain the faith and the hope for such global concerns as peace and justice and a healthy environment? Besides that, how do we keep the faith in our own personal lives when it seems that every day brings more bad news? We get tired. We are worn out physically, emotionally. We get tired of giving of ourselves. And I know, and we all know, the sort of exhaustion that can bring. Jesus said, anyone who believes in me shall never die. He also said, the water that I give you will never run out. You will never be thirsty. In Jesus, we find our lives and the way to sustain them. So today's parable doesn't speak of there being a shortage of anything. It doesn't speak of there being a shortage of oil for our lamps. It speaks only of the bridesmaids forgetting that they would need it. We forget sometimes that we can draw on Jesus' strength, his light, the water, and I know I forget as well. Keeping awake, as we're told to do, is knowing that we have all that we need to sustain us. If only we are open to receiving it. If only we remember that we need it and ask Jesus to give it to us. If only we remember we have a constant source of fresh water to keep our wells filled. We have a steady supply of precious oil to help light our way. If only we pause long enough to recognize and receive that precious gift. It's already ours. All we have to do is fill our lamps. And so that can be enough for us on those days when our hearts break at the pain and the suffering of the world. Because alone, you or I can't alter or change it, but we can keep our lamps full of oil. We can keep our lights shining as signs of promise and hope. And we have more than enough to do this. We have an abundant supply, and for now, isn't that enough to be able to keep our lights shining? And in the end, isn't that really everything? Because our light is what the world needs most of all.